many years, people have asked me about my family. And I simply said, oh, they're all dead now. And we moved on from there. And about 5 years ago, I was surprised by joy when I reconnected with some distant cousins out there in Minneapolis. I left there in 1971, and I completely lost contact with them, and I completely forgot about them. So it had been over 40 years since we had even spoken. Now, I have known and adored my cousin Ben since we were kids together. And he's about 3 years younger than I am. And my best memory of Bob is of a real skinny 8-year-old kid with a huge grin on his face, and he is holding up this massive string of fish. There must have been 40 northern pike on that string, and I don't think he caught them all himself, but he was proud. It's a great picture, it's a great memory. Ben was the son my dad always wanted but never had, so it was good. It's a big, big family. 10 kids, 6 kids, and that's my generation. And when we reunited, Ben and I were both in our 60s. A lot of water under that bridge. But Ben came home from hard combat in Vietnam, and he came home badly damaged. He's a serious thinker. He's smart, he's good looking, and he has a raging case of PTSD. And he disagrees vehemently with everything that I hold dear. It's really funny. I mean, we're just like that. And when we, Ben is angry, you know, that's part of the PTSD thing. He's angry most of the time. He's angry with God, especially. And he hollers, and he blusters, and he has to get his whole opinion out on the table right away without any interruptions so that he can be sure he's being heard. He's passionate. He argues. And I just abide. See, Ben doesn't scare me. He scares most people. He's kind of scary big, but doesn't scare me. And we argue about everything under the sun, including but not limited to politics and religion. Voices are raised, scorn is expressed, and I listen. And we adore each other. Simple as that. I take him seriously, and I value his opinion. He knows that, and he loves me for it. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this about my cousin Ben, because I know you were wondering, is because I believe the way that he and I interact together is very similar to what's happening in our gospel story today. I read one modern, as I was preparing this sermon, I read one modern commentator who was just horrified that Jesus, his Jesus, whom he loves, would call someone a dog. It's just a horrible thing to do, he said. He really could not get past it. Horrible. And he was equally disturbed that it appears that Jesus changes his mind. God is not supposed to change his mind. But here's Jesus wandering around in Gentile territory, and he heals this Syrophoenician child. Oh, the horror. The horror. Okay. We can deal with that point of view. Tyre and Sidon. I think the scripture mentions the Decapolis, the 10 cities. He was going into enemy territory. This was a totally non-Jewish locale. And to be not Jewish was to be the enemy at the time. So this woman comes out to see him, and she kneels, and she says very simply, "Sir, please heal my little daughter." And then they enter into this conversation, back and forth, give and take. It reminds me a lot of how my conversations with Ben sometimes go. Jesus says that what he is and what he does is for the Jews, not for other people. And he says it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Now the children of the Jews, the food is Jesus, and presumably the dogs are the Gentiles. Dogs were not highly regarded in the Middle East in those days, nor are they today. Cats, however. So he says it's not right to feed the dogs when the children are hungry. I wonder how many of us might stand up and indignantly say, "I am not a dog," and walk away from heart's desire out of pure pride. I know I would. That pride, it just sucks the heart out of everything, doesn't it? This Syrophoenician woman, though, she stayed. She said, "I may be a dog, but I'm God's dog, and I'm your dog. And crumbs from your table are worth more to me than a banquet anywhere else." You go, girl. She knows that Jesus is Lord. She acknowledges that he is the master and the source of life and healing for her daughter. And by insisting on the relationship, she gains the healing. Jesus effectively says, "You have declared yourself a member of the family by showing me your faith. You're in." And when Jesus opened the front door of God's house to the Gentile woman, there was no one left who could possibly be excluded. Take a look at the larger story Luke tells us. Jesus just fed 5,000 Jews, and there were whole bushel baskets of food left over. Everybody ate and was satisfied. Bushel baskets of food left over. Enough to feed every dog in Jerusalem, I tell you. And then he goes and tells the Pharisees that their purity laws can be ignored. He says all foods are okay, even the forbidden ones. Because it's not what you eat that gets you in trouble. Okay? And they're still reeling from that when he comes into the region of Tyre and Sidon, or Syron-Tidon, as I often call it, where the Gentiles are the enemies, and he heals 2 Gentiles, and then he feeds 4,000 non-Jews with the same bread that he fed the 5,000 with before. Most people don't know there's 2 feedings in Luke. The bread that is Jesus is infinite. We will never run out. There's no privilege attached to it. No one is more worthy than anyone else. We are all at the same table here. God's good news to us is that there's a place for each of us at God's table as children, not as dogs. Agreed? Yeah, you betcha. That's something I heard a lot in Minnesota. From the pulpit, I heard somebody say, "Don't you know?" And that is archetypal Minnesota talk. Don't you know? Yeah, you betcha. Okay. God's charge to us is to see that there is a place for everyone else at God's table also. Everyone's standing outside the door there, hoping for the invitation to come in. Now, there are some Christian communities where you need to sign on the dotted line that you believe certain things in order to be a full member of that community. Well, that's okay. God likes them too. I think of those churches when I think of a bell curve. You know, a bell curve measures frequency. And right in the middle is where everybody lands. And a zero standard deviation from the mean church means a big chunk of people right in the middle of the bell. And if you're one of those people, you will be happy and comfortable and fed there, and there is nothing wrong with that. What I like about our tradition is that we are sort of a 2 standard deviations from the mean church. That is, this is a place where everyone comes to the table. Now, the downside of this is that you'll never be in a community where everyone agrees with you. Can you stand that? The upside is you will always be in a community where someone agrees with you, no matter how far out you go. See, this relationship with God thing is not about orthodoxy. It's not about getting it right. It's about adoration. This is a place where if you're not sure about God, don't worry. God is sure about you. You belong here. If you don't blindly believe everything you're taught, who cares? God believes in you. Yes, indeed, we are Christian, capital C. No apologies there. Jesus is the window through which we encounter God, and I love him. But remember that it doesn't matter which team you play on. We are all in the league together. Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Baha'i, Hines, 57 variety, Canaanite or undecided. Hooray! You belong to God and God belongs to you. Why would the Lord create so many ways to adore him if they weren't all good ways? There's a family for each of us. This particular one, this Anglican one, happens to be a family of diversity and welcome. So step up to the table. You belong, and so does does that extremely odd person sitting next to you. Don't look. Too late. So today, along with Jesus, we affirm, come in, and dogs, welcome here.